watching Charter Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerantz in the nation's capital today. We are joined by Greg Walden. He is a member of the United States Congress representing the state of Oregon. There's been a lot of focus on the drought in California, yet, sir, the Pacific Northwest is suffering as well. And we're just hearing reports of it. You represent significant portions of Oregon, actually geographically very significant portions.
2/3 of the state.
2/3 of the state. So give us a sense on the ground, what are we seeing in your beautiful state?
You know, one of the worst droughts we've seen in decades, probably back to the 1970s, maybe some further back than that. And it stems in part from the lack of snowpack we had this year. I think it's 9% of average in a lot of the Cascade Mountains. And so we've got fire conditions coming on earlier. We've had some lightning strikes and fires starting.
This is Oregon. This is where there's rain all year round.
There's two Oregons.
There's two Oregons,
there's sort of
right.
the west side gets a lot of rain, and then there's my part of the state, which is 2/3, and a pretty high desert plateau, but even there we're significantly low in our reservoirs with no snowpack to run off. Now we did get some rain, which has been helpful, not enough. It's not the Texas sort of rain where you get 8 inches over the entire state on average. That would have filled up all the reservoirs in California and Oregon multiple times over.
Let it be.
But it is, so it's an issue for us.
So your governor has declared emergencies in several counties. She may be declaring emergencies in other counties. Appropriate?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, you look for this to come. This is pretty standard operation. And it's unfortunate, obviously, for our agricultural interests, for habitat, for, you know, stream flows, all the things we care about in the Northwest.
And so is it time to start seeing federal intervention? I mean, we know
There'll be some federal assistance as there is when there's a disaster of some measure. We really need to look at how do we maximize the use of the water that we have.
Do you have a vote coming? I hear the ringing. I think you'll be okay. Okay, we'll be good. So,
and so, I mean, there are the traditional disaster programs. But I think it's important that we look to how we conserve water, how we maximize its use to get efficiencies, and look for additional storage where we can.
So what efforts are being made in Oregon? Because California has been so singularly focused on this issue, and rightfully so. But look, Oregon and Washington are suffering as well.
They are, and so there are some limited projects underway or being considered. Store water underground in the winter, pump storage in out. In some areas, there's look at can you expand reservoir capacities. In some areas, it's pretty limited. The costs and the fight to site a new storage area is pretty huge.
Oh, no doubt.
And there aren't that many places we haven't built out.
And when you look at above ground storage, these are great long-term solutions, but Oregon needs relief today.
Right.
And so
there's not much you can do. I mean, you can't manufacture water.
Right. So what's being done? Your ag friends,
They're cutting back on the amount of acres planted. They're kind of risking it, if you will, in some areas where they're sort of hoping for rain. A lot of our ag land on the east side is dry land to begin with. So it's high desert plateau, it's dry land wheat. But we also have a lot of irrigated agriculture as well. But so it's a mix. It's not all irrigated. But where it is, they're stressed right now. They're concerned. Will they get through the whole season? You know, if we were to have a rainy summer, if we were to get an extra dump or two of rain in August or July, we might be able to eke through this. But the long and the short of it, you've got acreage idled, and people just realize this isn't going to be a great year.
And how is that impacting your constituents? What is being done?
It certainly hurts the economy in those areas that are affected. There won't be the harvest levels. In some cases, there won't be harvest at all. We also are dealing with a problem that occurred for a couple of days. I think last November, there was a deep freeze early and killed a lot of vegetation. You know, my own shrubs in my yard in Hood River suffered deeply. Yes, I get to replant them.
Oh my, could be enjoyable. Could be enjoyable, right?
But some of the cherry orchards suffered damage that could, in some cases, they have to replant the trees because it killed them. In other cases, may have hurt the wood back to where it could be a year or 2 or 3 before they produce cherries again. It just depends upon where you were and all of that. So there was some real damage done because of this deep freeze. Then you had the drought after that.
You mentioned the risk of wildfire, which is significant, especially when the land is dry and Oregon well-wooded, well-forested. We've talked about this in the past. What is the state doing? What is the federal government doing on the question of potential wildfires?
You know, it's more of a federal government issue than state. 55% of the landmass in part of Oregon I represent is under federal management,
BLM?
or lack of management, and Forest Service. And so a lot of that is sort of high desert. A lot of it's timber. And in the federal forest land, not enough is being done. It costs you 4 times as much to fight fire as to go in and do treatment to get the forest in balance. They're overstocked. They're disease-ridden. You get a drought, they become more susceptible to disease and
beetles.
Bugs. Exactly. So then you get more fuel load. And the Forest Service, because of the laws, rules, litigation, really has their hands tied.
I've spoken with some members from Montana, and they are looking at revising federal rules as it relates to timber. They're looking at trying to prevent what's been called predatory law litigation as a way to allow reasonable timber management. Do you have a sense of how that legislation's marching forward and whether it could help? Slowly.
Not fast enough.
Okay.
And I've been part of those efforts over the years, helped write the Healthy Forest Restoration Act, which became law, which allows for an expedited process, still allowing appeal, but not endless appeal.
I see.
For some of these groups that want to stop active management, the appeal process has become an ATM. I mean, they can appeal, and under the Equal Access to Justice Act, with the complexity of the laws, they generally win on some point, and then they get a payment. And so it just perpetuates an industry of litigation that gets a big payout, almost no matter what happens. I had the chief of the Forest Service several years ago admit to me that even when they win at the Forest Service, sometimes the court will order a payment for legal expenses for the plaintiffs. That's just plain wrong. And the agencies can't even tell us how much taxpayer money is going out the door. They haven't completed their report since 2004. And so we're just trying to get to the point where they'll tell us, what's this costing us? We know what it costs us on the ground. Loss of habitat, destruction of our watersheds, loss of jobs, impoverished communities, and timber stands that go up in flames, and especially in a year like this. We've already had lightning strikes and early fire season. It's burning in Oregon as if it were August, and yet it's June.
I want to talk about another element as it relates to water, and that's what's known as the Waters of the United States rule. It's become fairly controversial, and yet there's bipartisan agreement in large part on the notion that the EPA may have overstepped when
have overstepped.
I'm just being a neutral journalist. I'm just being a neutral journalist.
I don't have to be. They completely overstepped. The Clean Water Act started out as managing navigable waterways, like rivers. Okay, the Columbia River, you know, pick a major river. Then it moved beyond that, and now it's down to mud puddles, irrigation ditches, intermittent streams that dry up. I don't see many ships going up and down. It is a federal government grab of water in the West.
So for those that are taking the position you're taking, the good news is there's bipartisan agreement that the EPA may have gone too far, as you might have gone, has gone too far.
It has clearly gone too far.
So what now? What now?
So we have legislation to roll it back. It's been approved by the House. We will try and cut them off at the pocketbook, which is about the only way you get an agency's attention in Washington.
Let's talk about let's talk about your friends in the Senate, because I understand the House has moved forward. There are bipartisan bills percolating in the Senate. But where are we?
Well, we've done our business in the House.
Just
I'm not worthy to understand how the upper chamber operates. But the long and the short of it is they need to step up, because this will have a huge negative impact on people's lives and the economy of our rural communities. And unnecessarily so, sets up a whole new framework of litigation. And if you can link from that pothole to that intermittent stream thousands of feet away, you can create a macrame net here of regulation.
I like the metaphor. That
will shut down agriculture. It will shut down public access. It is another outrageous federal government overreach. It's completely unnecessary.
And on that note, he is Greg Walden, member of the U.S. Congress. I'm Brad Pomerantz. It's Charter Local Edition. This is Charter Local Edition. My name is Brad Pomerantz in the nation's capital. We are joined today by Schrader. He is a member of the United States Congress representing the state of Oregon, the beautiful state of Oregon. But the beautiful state of Oregon is facing a drought. Who would have thunk? California, we know, is facing a drought, but your beautiful state is in drought. What's happening, sir?
Well, climate has changed.
Right.
Climate has changed. Regardless of what side of that issue you're on, it's making a huge difference to the farming community in my state. Also the forestry industry, too. We're worried, very worried about the wildfires this coming season.
It's interesting you mentioned climate change because your new governor, Kate Brown, when she declared an emergency for 7 counties dealing with drought, she specifically gave a shout out to this notion of climate change. What's your sense of that and the importance that she appeared to put on this issue?
Well, it's a big issue in Oregon. There's controversy there like any other place. But the effects are obvious and devastating. Farmers, local communities, the tribes, folks interested in the fish run in our great state, iconic salmon fish run, all are in grave, grave danger. There are proposals in our state legislature for accessing water in the Columbia off-season and using it to rehydrate aquifers to be used during the farming season. Lots of great ideas out there. And I think in Congress it's up to us to step forward. We have a forest resiliency bill we're trying to do to reduce the hazards out there, make it so if there are fires because of this drought that's going to be less damaging, and make sure that these counties, these communities actually get the assistance they need.
I'm wondering though, there's so much noise surrounding the California drought. You know, we're starting to hear about Oregon and Washington facing drought, and it's almost an anathema to think, how could those two states face drought? The rain capitals of America, but yet these are real. These are real. So how do you get your colleagues to recognize the severity of the issue in the Pacific Northwest?
Well, the bills there's no earmarks anymore.
Okay.
So good news is, if California wants to get something done, they have to appeal to a broader swath of America, and Oregon and Washington are more than willing to help. And frankly, we have our friends in the Southwest that face perennial droughts and stuff. The Midwest on occasion, our Southeast partners have had the same issue. So I would hope there'd be common interest there.
You mentioned wildfires, and those are a serious concern. As the drought continues, the forest gets dry, the beetles come in, those diseased
Hazardous
trees
fuels build up.
Right, and so what's happening on that front?
Well, we're approaching it two-pronged way. I've got a bill I'm co-sponsoring with Mike Simpson in the House, Senator Walden, or excuse me, Senator Wyden, Senator Crapo in the Senate.
So bipartisan.
Bipartisan bill to treat wildfire disasters the same as any other disaster. Believe it or not, Brad, they're not treated the same as floods or hurricanes or anything else. So we have to take the money out of the already depleted Forest Service budget, which is inappropriate. So that's one front, and then right now we're looking at working with G.T. Thompson, bipartisanly, Republican from Pennsylvania, on a resiliency bill where we would work with collaboratives, community action plans, to streamline the NEPA process and make sure we can get into these woods early on, reduce the hazardous fuels, make these communities whole again, and actually hopefully prevent these fires from getting started in the first place.
What about the question of timber? Some of your friends on the Republican side, Montana, Greg Walden, another congressman, they're looking at creating some formulas that in their mind would speed the timber harvest.
Well, in a sustainable way. I mean, Congressman Walden, Congressman DeFazio, and myself had a bill, an ONC bill, Oregon and California Counties bill last session. No one thought we could get it out of committee or the House. We passed it out of committee, out of the House, sent it to the Senate that actually increased the harvest, but in a sustainable way. We talked about ecological forestry, trying to do it in a smart way to empower the counties, as well as make sure, to this whole discussion on wildfire and drought, to make sure the forests are healthier and more resilient going forward. Not enough time for the Senate to fully consider it. Senator Wyden had a bill very similar. So the goal here is to put these things together. We're still looking at doing that in this Congress.
I want to talk about another issue facing this Congress, a very important, contentious issue, and that focuses on trade and free trade. A lot of emotions on this question, and the debate is not cutting along party lines. You have Democrats and Republicans on the same side and on opposite sides. So let's talk most broadly about the notion of free trade and the notion that presidents should be given the authority to negotiate deals with other nations in such a way that when it comes back to America, it's an up or down vote. to avoid the need to renegotiate time and time again. What can you tell us about this
Well, that
question?
process has been around since Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Okay.
So it's nothing new. Democrats and Republicans have acceded to this authority, realizing that amending these things after the fact and trying to renegotiate is fraught with failure.
Right.
So the trick was, I think this time, is can we get a fast track authority, a trade promotion authority that reflects more transparency, labor and environmental concerns, and deals with some of the 21st century issues we haven't had to deal with in previous TPAs. This new one does all those things.
One could argue, I mean, we look at what's in the actual bill authorizing TPA, and it does, I think, 150 concerns are listed, kind of directives to the president and his team.
Main policy areas includes government-sponsored organizations competing against our private businesses. We can deal with that here. Currency manipulation, data theft.
Let me ask you about currency, because that is one issue where there's been a lot of consternation about whether this TPA, or any TPA for that matter, can really address the currency manipulation question. You know, China obviously is the big culprit here. China, though, is not part of this specific TPP. So I'm wondering why we're even talking about currency manipulation if China's not even part of this.
But hopefully this is a template to going forward. You authorize this fast track authority for a period of time, maybe 6 years. Pick your time frame. So while we're focused on the Trans-Pacific Partnership deal and the Europe deal, the TTIP deal, there may be an opportunity to have another. But we want to make sure that when the president is negotiating for us, Brad, that he knows what Congress, what the people want us to be having him talk about, what we need.
One area that's also caused some concern deals with human rights.
Yes,
and if we look at the list of countries in the 12 countries as part of the TPP, I mean, some of them are our friends: Australia, New Zealand, Canada. We presume their human rights records are going to be fine. Brunei, Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, not as much.
Correct.
And so, you know, while one may have confidence that we can negotiate strong human rights protections, enforcement becomes tricky.
Not so much.
Tell me.
My opinion, unless you have these people in an agreement, you have no leverage.
One could argue.
You have no enforcement mechanism. If they are part of this agreement and they do not up their game with regard to human rights, and I was talking to one of the ambassadors about Vietnam and what they're trying to do right now in terms of improving their situation, because they'd like to be able to trade with the United States without high tariffs.
Indeed.
But if they don't own up, then we are legally able to penalize them by having access to their lower tariffs as a result of this agreement, but that we can then jack up our tariffs back up to where they were and say, sorry, you're not living up to the agreement, so we have countervailing tariffs.
So what have you said?
So it works to our advantage.
Okay, so what have you said to your friends, especially in the Democratic Party, that have been most concerned about what happened with NAFTA? They have a perception that NAFTA didn't live up to its billing. You know, someone else could read NAFTA differently and say it has lived up to it, but let's just, for argument's sake, what do you say to your friends?
Well, I mean, they've got a legitimate point of view. I mean, they've been concerned. I think 20, 25 years ago, America was the economy of the world. And a big concern it was just going to ship some jobs overseas or out to Mexico. And I think it did do some of that. My point to them is this is a different time. The economy has gotten so much more global right now. There is a rising middle class overseas in a lot of these countries we're talking about, maybe some partners we'd want in the future, you know, like India or what have you, that can buy our stuff that weren't there 20 years ago. China is now a superpower economically, and they're going to be making these trade deals. If we don't, do you want China working conditions or do you want American working conditions? It's pretty safe. And who do you want to control the agenda going forward economically in the 21st century? I want the United States.
His name is Kurt Schrader. He is a member of the U.S. Congress. He represents the beautiful state of Oregon. My name is Brad Palmer, and you are watching Charter Local Edition. This is Charter Local Edition. My name is Brad Pomerantz. We are in Washington, D.C. today. We are joined by Suzanne Bonamici. She is a member of the United States Congress representing the beautiful state of Oregon. It must be hard living in a beautiful state like Oregon.
It's quite easy.
Quite easy, exactly.
It is a beautiful
I
state.
can imagine.
And a wonderful state.
And I want to speak with you about one of your committee assignments. You're on the Education Committee.
Yes.
And I'm the father of two daughters, 7th grade, 5th grade. And I know a lot of parents are feeling frustration and confusion about those standardized tests.
Yes.
And the effectiveness of them. Talk to us about what you're doing on the question of standardized tests and trying to reform or streamline.
Sure,
Please.
thank you. First I want to say public education is such an important part of
Right.
what we do in our communities and our society to give every child an opportunity to learn and succeed and thrive. So my commitment to public education goes way back before my time as a policymaker. So I'm honored to serve on the Education and
Right.
Workforce Committee. And we have been spending time, this Congress, working on what we can do about the high stakes testing.
Right.
Now, that conversation comes up as part of something called the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Now, that's a law that was passed about 50 years ago as part of the war on poverty
Wow.
to try to make education more equal and fair for students across the country. Now, people today know it as No Child Left Behind, right? And that came about in a different version of that bill. So what we're doing with the No Child Left Behind is trying to make it so that it gets back to its original purpose of equity for students across the country. So Title I funding for low-income schools comes through that. We want to make sure that those schools that serve high concentrations of low-income students get that additional assistance that they need. But with regard to the standardized tests,
Right.
I actually have bipartisan legislation.
Nice.
It's called SMART.
Right.
Start making
Right.
assessments reliable and timely.
Okay,
SMART.
good.
So what that does is fewer, better assessments.
And let's be specific, because there is this sense, as part of No Child Left Behind or otherwise, that it's a drill and kill atmosphere. You got to get them to perform for that standardized test, and
Right.
there are so many of them.
There are so many of them because there's tests that are required by the federal government,
Right.
the state government, then districts.
Right.
So, our teachers need to be assessing students.
Right.
But assessments should be to inform instruction so that they know where the students need to improve. So the SMART Act will help school districts do an audit of how many assessments there are. It will help teachers learn assessment literacy so they can make better use of the assessments. So I have been an advocate for moving away from that high stakes testing and putting so much importance on just the classes that are tested.
How does Common Core interact with what you're describing? Because as you know, for the vast majority of the country which has adopted Common Core, there are new types of standardized tests.
Exactly.
And some would say to the benefit, maybe playing in conjunction with what you're doing, because these are standardized tests that are adaptive. They look at your answers and then you move on based upon whether you got it right or wrong. And Common Core is looking for deeper knowledge as opposed to just surface knowledge. So
Critical thinking.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, Oregon has had adaptive testing for a long time.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yes, we have been ahead of the curve.
Of
because
course you
Oregon,
have.
we're
Of course you
leaders.
have.
So we've had adaptive testing for
Okay.
a long time. So let me back up to get to your question. Common Core is about high standards, and we all want high standards
course.
for our students. Where my concern comes in is if there are too many high stakes associated with that testing, if the tests are too long and there are too many of them. So again, we need to get back to fewer, better assessments and aim for those high standards. But we can't be doing that at the cost of things like cutting important classes like career and technical education classes where students get that hands-on learning. Classes like art and music that really lead to a well-rounded education and a well-rounded citizenry.
Now, how do we get to a place, though, where the pendulum doesn't swing so far the other way that we don't have diagnostic tests to see where our students
Oh,
are.
we will. Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we
Right.
do need to have those assessments. And one of the things that we'll be talking about in the committee is making sure that we have really good training and education programs for our teachers. Because when you have a great teacher, that teacher is going to be assessing the student and know where the student needs to improve.
I want to shift gears a bit and speak about a sea change in our nation that I would have never predicted. And that is America's view of LGBT Americans.
Right.
Who would have thunk 5-10 years ago that we would see marriage equality in many states in the Union?
Right.
That is a wonderful development for those that are part of that community. But there are those that are part of that community that are older.
Right.
They didn't get married. Their families may not be around. Their families may have rejected them.
Right. Right.
I know that you're looking at that community with a laser
Sure.
beam and trying to
Absolutely.
serve them and their needs.
Yes.
Talk to me about that.
Right. Well, and I'm looking at the aging population in general.
Yes, you are.
But I've had some great conversations, specific conversations with our LGBT seniors, because there are issues that come up in things like home care,
Right.
assisted living facilities, to make sure that nobody faces discrimination in their older years. So the Older Americans Act is something that I'm working on, and that's a law that deals with these important programs. You know, it's so important for people to be able to live out their lives with dignity, whether they're in their home or an assisted
Right.
living facility or an independent care facility. So what we want to do with the Older Americans Act is make sure that those programs are available to help our seniors, from Meals on Wheels.
And tell me about
Yes.
Meals on Wheels. I understand that you recently took a trip and visited, is that right?
Yes,
Meals on Wheels?
I've been visiting
yeah.
Meals on Wheels
Okay.
centers and senior community centers in the district I'm honored
Right,
to represent. So,
sure.
so I visit schools and I visit senior
both
centers.
sides, right, both sides of the
as well
spectrum.
as farms and
Of
small
course.
businesses. So,
But you know, Meals on Wheels, it's an iconic program.
it is.
And so tell
so
me about
important.
what you've seen. I feel like, was it Beaverton? Where did you go recently?
Oh, I've been many
Everywhere.
places.
Okay.
I've been many
Be that as
places.
yeah.
But the Meals on Wheels programs are so important because oftentimes when the person who's delivering that meal to the senior, that might be the only
know,
person that senior sees that day. And so it's the nutrition, but it is also the social interaction and communication. And our senior centers that have community meal programs, they don't just offer the meal, they have discussion groups and
Right.
classes, and that is so important for our aging population.
And with regard to the LGBT senior, even though the country does seem to be evolving on this issue, assuming that you have specific protections in the Older Americans Act, are your friends on the Republican side supportive?
We're working on that.
Okay.
I don't think anybody supports discrimination. So
Okay.
if we look at it that way, we don't want to discriminate. We want to make sure that everyone is able to age with dignity.
And where do you go from here with this? Because obviously it's an issue that is important to you. You want to help all seniors,
Yes.
regardless of where they may stand on any issue, be that as it may. Or,
Well, we're working on the Older Americans Act, and we're working with the administration to make sure that no one faces discrimination. So the Older Americans Act goes through the Education and Workforce Committee.
Explain that. How does that work?
That's just one of those jurisdictional things. So, I plan to continue to work on that and see if we can get that through. I know that the Senate is working on it as well. So.
Her name is Suzanne Bonamici. She is a member of the United States Congress representing significant portions of the beautiful state of Oregon. My name is Brad Pomerantz. We are coming to you from the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. We thank you so much for joining us on Charter Local Edition.